My conversation today is with astrologer, scholar, and teacher Soledad Davies. Aside from being a skilled and highly visible astrologer in her own right, Soledad is founder and director of Psicocymatica, the only Spanish-speaking school that offers an academic study of astrology, and which was initially inspired by her research with sound, geometry, and astrology. To learn more about Soledad and Psicocymatica, check the links I've included with this episode. I sat down with Soledad to talk about modern scholarship in esotericism, her thorough academic training, her astrological practice, and early experiences within astrology, and much more. I'm Ike Baker, and this is the Arcanum Podcast. Soledad Davies, thank you so much for joining me today. I've had a real treat with speaking with you before we got on this call, and I'm really excited about everything that you're doing in astrology and in Hermeticism and the Western esoteric traditions. And I definitely consider you one of the up and coming scholars on the subject. So I'm very happy that you're here with me today. Thanks.
Thank you to you, I for the invitation, and for me, it's always a pleasure to talk about that astrology. So let's do it.
Great. So, I mean, what brought you to astrology? What got you interested? And I would say, were you always a believer in this sort of stuff? I know a lot of people come at it from they're curious, but they have this positivistic mindset that they're also holding on to. You know, it's almost like they don't want to let go sometimes. So were you always a believer in this kind of stuff, or how'd you get into it?
Yes, since my childhood, I have the sense of something more, a kind of the sense of soul, let's say. So I came more from that side of reality, let's say. So yeah, since my childhood, I have this feeling and this idea. And when I was a teenager, I started to study and reading about philosophy, and also I was very, very connected with poetry and this kind of stuff. But the paradigm we live is very different to that feeling. So that feeling actually, my view of reality led me when I was a teenager to a very, very deep depression, actually. And so I was undergoing for more or less 10 years psychiatric treatment, like going in and out from mental clinics and psychiatric treatment and clinics because of this, not only the belief, but the experience of that I had during my childhood and when I was a teenager, what we can say transpersonal experiences or paranormal experiences, like feeling and things, entities or whatever you want to call it. So that led me to psychiatry at that moment for more or less 10 years. And nearly my Saturn return, when I was 26 or so, I started to question my treatment, especially because I was taking lots and lots of pills. So I started to question that, and also to start looking for other kind of therapies and treatments to my illness. That's how I came across with transpersonal theories and transpersonal psychology, and I started to change my view of my crisis and my experiences, and this growth idea of transpersonal emergency or spiritual emergencies. And in one of those centers, I am from Patagonia, Argentina, but at that time I was living in Buenos Aires, in Argentina. And one of the transpersonal centers I went at that time, they were working with sacred plants and especially ayahuasca. So along with the change of view, I did my first ceremonial ritual of ayahuasca with them. And it was very, very illuminating because this split that I have in my experience of life between a subtle reality that and unseen reality and what it's supposed to be life, like this productive paradigm we live in. So I was very split within myself, and this first ceremony with ayahuasca was a relief actually, because it was okay, both reality exist at the same time. That was the main revelation, which I already knew, but I had experienced like the confirmation somehow. And I was 26, 27 years old, and the week after that, the first ceremony, I flew to Peru, to the jungle, and I did one of the dietas, which is a kind of retreat of minimum 8 days, and where you do like regularly ayahuasca and other kind of local plants. So I did that. And during that retreat, I started to have the calling for astrology. When I was a teenager, I was into these kind of experiences and readings, but astrology was always like in a side of that. But during the dieta, this ayahuasca retreat, I received the calling. So I returned back to Buenos Aires at that time. The next year, I started officially my studies in astrology in one of the main school of astrology in Buenos Aires, which has a strong psychological and esoteric orientation, modern orientation. But when I ended this first program in astrology, the year after that, I started my first steps into the academy already with Richard Tarnas at the CIIS, the California Institute of Integral Studies. And that's when I came across for the first time with the history of astrology, Vetus Valens and Manilus, others, but also with some of the developments that Richard Tarnas and his team is doing on archetypal cosmology, which articulates many of the ancient wisdom, but also contemporary philosophy. And after that, I started the master in cultural astronomy and astrology with Nicholas Kempion at the University of Wales, Trinity St. David. And for many years during the master, I've been navigating very, very deeply the study of theories and practices of astrology. And I fell in love also with the academic study of astrology. I'm also a practitioner. I'm not, I'm not in the clothes, I can say that I don't have the issue of saying that I'm a scholar and also a practitioner. So I finished the master some years ago, and now I'm doing my PhD research in the same university with Nick Campion. But also I've been doing like some studies also on Western esotericism at the University of Amsterdam,
Yes.
and other also studies at the University of Stockholm in Sweden on magic in the history of European religion. So that's my kind of path within the academy.
Great. Yeah, I noticed that you were studying Western esotericism. I also noticed that you talk about it and you have certain courses that are available on Western esotericism, which I think is really important. You know, coming from that practitioner background, coming from somebody who has lived the experience, I had similar when I was growing up, I had very jarring experiences of apparitions, visitations, but I was able to shut it off,
Mhm.
and just like completely close that door for a number of years. And then when I underwent initiation, it just opened the floodgates back up like 10
Again,
times.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes, yes, totally.
But so how has your study of Western esotericism academically, how has that augmented or fit into your astrological work and that paradigm? What are you hoping to sort of broaden your scope or hyper focus and obtain more context, or how are you finding that these two things fit together for you?
The practice and the research, you mean,
Yes.
in my path? Well, I think that um, the rationales and the frameworks of our work to study, um, yeah, the rationale of what we do, for me at least, is very important. I would say that I'm very like geek or nerd in this topic, so I love studying. I love studying. But also, for example, learning and studying the history of astrology gave me much more sense about my practice right now. Not only in a sense that when I calculate a natal chart or an horoscope today, is like I have all this lineage within me and within my practice, but also to understand the practice today, not only myself or my practice, but also the contemporary practice and how the history of influences that we use today. And so, yeah, I think it's important, especially for astrology, that today is becoming very, very popular, and astrology have lost their social reputation since the 17th century onwards, more or less. So this kind of research is very important to recuperate and recover that reputation. And for that, we need some rationales and fundamentals, how we explain astrology somehow. But also, I think that the academic research tends to be more like we love to define things and categorize things and the characteristics of things. And that's interesting, but also when we come into the practice, it gets very blurred and vague also. Is we cannot define some things in a very limited way. For example, in Hermeticism, we have that we have the practice and the philosophical books and the practice of Hermeticism. And I think that is much more complex than that when we go into the practice and experience of that.
Mhm.
So in order to have the full experience, we need to put in aside a lot of categories that we have in mind.
Mhm.
And but if you have in mind the kind of mentality, let's say, that we are using for each context, I think that's fine. But also within academic, I think that the methodologies that we use for research are already in question. And this idea of the object of the study, for example, and that we as researcher, we are participating in the thing, the object of the study, and that this emic ethic perspective within the research. So I think that the questions are on the table around methodology. That I think is the one of the key things around how we studied these topics. Not because we talk about a lot about esotericism and the I don't know, magic practices, for example, dreams, but I cannot reference a dream sometimes. If I put in my footnote, this I took it from my last night dream, is not academically correct. But I think that things are changing because now there are methodology like auto ethnology, for example, that we can put directly on your research, your own experiences. But always you have to contextualize that.
Right. Yeah, there's a broader trend in scholarship emerging right now, and I think it's shaking some of the ground that the establishment is standing on. And so they're feeling it. I think the prescient ones, the smart ones, the ones with foresight are kind of like, okay, I now need to adapt to this. And then the ones who are not, who have a little bit more pride, I think, maybe a little bit more stake in things staying the same, are going to come and combat that with terms like religionism, and calling practitioners, scholars, religionists. When the thing is, you talk about things being very, methodical, categorizations, and it's extremely Aristotelian. And for a while, that helped human beings see more deeply into their experience. But now I think the tables have turned, and whereas the mind, overall, generally the mind experienced reality as this kind of gestalt, the way that you're talking about, and we were able to achieve clarity and conciseness, and develop technology by using these methodological compartments. Now, what's happening is that the mind is being so influenced by this perceptual filter that we're not even really, we're trying to conform our mental experience of the world to these categories. And it doesn't make sense, because that's not the way life is experienced. And it will cause, in a lot of people, it's caused me serious amounts of distress and years of self-medication, and a very similar story. These things in and of themselves, it's not the way human experience is organically occurs. And I think that it can create a lot of mental bifurcation that manifests as, I would say, divergent behaviors. Like we have all these issues now because we're trying to conform our experience of the world to a methodological method. Like it's a system. Instead of using it as a tool, we're now trying to conform our entire experience to it.
That's why I think that this flowering of the study of esotericism, and within that astrology, is important, because we need a change of paradigm. And when we go into these studies and ancient wisdom, we find a different kind of cosmology. How they experience and understand reality is very different. So we need to recover that in order to rethink that in our times. But it's an emergency
Yeah.
this is something that is happening already. We have this new science and new paradigms, ideas already since the middle of 20th century. So we are building a new paradigm, and that's why I think that this kind of study are very important. Also because is building the new paradigm within this context,
Yeah.
the same context that trying to methodologize, as you say, like in separate places. From within that, we are doing something different also.
Yeah, I think the work that you specifically are doing is very important to that because you have a very broad reach and you have a foot planted firmly in both worlds now. So, and it's, there's a level of sincerity and authenticity that you bring to this that's very encouraging. But to your point earlier, astrology certainly has re-entered the mainstream to a significant degree, and there's so many different kinds that people are kind of touting right now. What specifically would you say is the system that you side more on? Is it Vedic? Is it traditional? Is it more modern?
Well, I used to be a little bit critic also with so many categories in astrology. I think that so many categories is a thing that we find in our times. So I prefer to call it astrology, and that's it.
Very good.
And the same with Hermeticism. We have a tradition which includes many different currents and theories and practice, but it's astrology and the history of astrology. This dichotomy between traditional and modern is something actually modern, or some scholars, and I will include myself in this view. We understand that the revival of traditional astrology during the 20th century opens up the postmodern time of the history of astrology. But I prefer to call astrology, or the tradition of astrology, as a only tradition that includes many astrologies, you know. So I used to be actually very critic of that because we still we are using this polarized mentality between one thing and another. And if you go into this different practice, both of them took us to the same roots. When you study the history of astrology, you can understand how that was happening and the importance of translations during time. During the history of astrology, you have many gaps in the history when the study of the development of astrology was lost in some part of the world and migrate or went to other part of the world and then came back with translation. And this is the same that happened during the 20th century. But I understand that many astrology needs to legitimize themselves against modern astrologers and the popularization of astrology, but it's a thing of legitimization, only
Yes.
that. But my view is that, and it's a very academic view actually, that is astrology and the tradition of astrology that includes many philosophical currents and theories and practices. Within those currents in the history of astrology, my roots are founded in the Hermetic perspective, of course, that has a very soteriological purpose of astrology. It's not only an instrument to find lost objects, for example, or because within our mentality and modern mentality, we take astrology and we use it as an instrument. Because we are in this instrumentalist and productive materialist world, or framework or paradigm. So we take astrology and we put it and we use it like that. But the soteriological, salvational aspect and purpose, the idea of purpose is very important. For what we use astrology? I think that is important. And then we have many techniques and practices to use it within that purpose. My purpose is soteriological, and from that I use many techniques from Hellenistic period and also Babylonic period to modern. Because actually, if you see like modern psychological astrology, they have this soteriological aspect. In a very different way, sometimes, especially cosmologically and anthropologically, is different from Hermeticism or ancient Hermetism. But they have that purpose. The orientation is in there. But modern astrology is a kind of reductionist or decaf kind of astrology, technically speaking. And when you start to use more technique and more methodology, as you can find in the history of astrology, it help you a lot, because they are very complementary. For me, they are very complementary. So I don't like to split astrology anymore. Actually, I try to do the opposite, like to fill that gap that we often divide astrologies.
Well, I feel very much aligned with what you're saying, because I see this in esotericism generally. This really, to me, it comes down to intent. What do you intend to use this for? And it's the same thing with magic, right? Ceremonial ritual and things like this. You have more of a goetic or even some aspects of Solomonic, what we would call conjuration. And so this is typically used for mundane means. I need to know something, I need to divine something, knowledge, I need a question answered, I need something acquired. Whereas there's a soteriological component that runs through the initiatic transmission.
Exactly.
The way that the way magic is handed down through the ages is theurgic. Is purificatory, is dealing with the central, as you say, purpose, right? Or the Greek word maybe telos of the entire system is specifically soteriological. And I think, going back to the first question, okay, how does Western esotericism augment your understanding of these things? This might be a way, because that's certainly what it did to me. It reoriented me to the fact that Neoplatonically, hermetically, Gnostically, there is one soteriological dilemma that runs throughout all of this stuff. Ontological dilemma, really, of embodied experiences, a spirit, a soul in physical incarnation. This is a dilemma. And so the answer to this is soteriological. And you find it, I have heard you refer to astrology as a symbolic vocabulary, which I love. I love, because it truly is. All of these things are. And there's a reason why I think the astrological symbolism comprises so much of overall magical symbolic vocabulary. It has a lot of real estate there. And I think, one thing that maybe we can talk about is, for me, it all got reoriented when I understood Plato's myth of Ur and the soteriological or the cosmological model of the universe, right? That was the dominant model for 1500 years. And then it gets developed into Porphyry's ideas of like the astral garments, the accretions, as the soul is ushered down into materiality, it puts on the vices and virtues of the planets, depending on their disposition, how they're related to one another, aspects and things like this, dignity. And then you even see that in the Poimandros of the Hermetica when he goes to the first zone and releases these certain powers or vices, goes to the second zone. And so, I mean, do you derive kind of a cosmological scheme from this stuff? Are you working under that as well, the Hellenistic
Yes.
cosmology?
Yes, totally. Myself and also the rationale and the foundation for astrology, we find it in Platonic philosophy, also Aristotle and Stoics and Hermetism. And this kind of difference, the articulation of philosophies are in the basis and the foundation of astrology that explain how astrology works till today. Not only because even if the paradigm changed during the 17th, 18th century, how astrology works is the same. Astrology still relies on a geocentric cosmology. Even if you can find heliocentric developments in astrology, but the rationale and the framework is still, the cosmology is still geocentric. So yeah, that's the philosophical roots of astrology. And let me say something about this idea of symbol and symbolic language of astrology, because I think that is also very connected, because the root of symbola, is the idea of something that is completed and have and was splitted. You need to reunite. So within the idea of symbol and the root of symbola, you have this idea of religare, of religion also, and to reconnect. So it's a different kind of perception, it's a different kind of language that you need in order to perceive the interconnectedness of reality. You need symbols for that, you need metaphor for that. So it's not only a poetic kind of saying or definition of astrology, but a very deep practice, the symbolic thought or symbolic language, because it's another kind of language, and the one that we are using now, like talking, and this idea of cognitive and linear kind of language. Because within symbol and symbolic perception is a kind of you find different kind of and levels of meaning. Actually, you don't have only one meaning. Within that symbol, you have many symbols, and we need symbol in order to connect and to perceive interconnectedness and correspondences. So that's why I say that is, and well, of course, it is a symbolic, but also relies in number and geometry. That is very precise. So in astrology, you have these two different kind of mind working together, which seems to me very interesting and very illuminating also in order to connect with something else, with that thing that we cannot say in words or think about that. Because we are using both kind of minds. And also we have this debate throughout the history of astrology between science and religion, and today if astrology is a science or is a divination. We have this kind of debates. And when you track the history of influences on these debates, you go till Plato, Aristotle, Hermetism, of course, and the Stoics. But today there are other authors and scholars trying to do that work as well. For example, as I said, the archetypal cosmology, they are articulating this ancient wisdom with new developments in science, like those of Rupert Sheldrake with morphic fields, the idea of implicated order of the Big Bomb, the idea of organicism, and panentheism and panpsychism. There are different, the idea that the mind is not in the brain, but it extends more than that. These are very useful explanation, but we have still the problem of divination, how the meaning, how we take from that a meaning of that. From this, the different definition of a symbol or the tradition in astrology and the different definition of a planet, for example, which of those are the correct? So that's when we have a divinatory experience and divinatory perception, because it's a hermeneutical art, astrology, at the end, through astronomy. And this is something that was already distinguished by Ptolemy from the beginning, that astrology and astronomy, they have a symbiotic relation, but are not the same. So it's a practice through astronomy, but also this debate between what is the causes of things. Are the planets and the stars causing the events on Earth, or we are in a relationship with that, and so we can change the events here on Earth, the deterministic and fatalistic side of astrology, and the ones that push more into the soteriological and salvational aspect and practice of the practice of astrology. So we have different kind of perception that also led us to different kind of results or explanations on astrology. But I don't know if I'm opening too many windows. But for me, the framework or the explanation, how we framework astrology today, is very, very important. Because we have, on the one hand, we have lost the philosophical aspect of astrology, and we need to recover it, like to think how this kind of question, how it works, and how we explain that, and from different kind of perspective. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to do within the Spanish-speaking community, trying to recover this aspect, because when you read now, astrology is very popular, and you read a lot of things in social media, for example, in popular astrology, that is new moon or is full moon, so this is what it will happen, or is a time for this or that. And so we're still in a kind of mentality that is because this, then that. So it's very linear kind of thoughts, that doesn't take into account the participatory and divinatory aspect of astrology, that we can only happen during the experience, not before, not because some ancient astrologer said that, but it's within the experience, the divinatory and the symbolic experience. So yeah, I think it's very important to to ask these questions and to think and reflect on those questions.
Yeah, just for anybody listening, I want to kind of point out also that's another one of the reasons why astrology is so potent in terms of a theurgic or magical practice. We tend to use it as the kairos, the weather or the auspicious timing for these particular operations, but in reality, it's that astrology is sort of a body of knowledge that can describe what we are experiencing, and because they need to be experienced, and they are symbols for certain experiences, certain things that are natural and to some degree intuitive to us. So yeah, I think that's a really good point, that like there are ways to experience astrology rather
Yeah, and
than
also because astrology is not only uh, casting and calculating natal charts or
right.
different kind of horoscope, but also is an understanding of reality itself. So
Yeah,
it is a cosmology.
yeah,
And in that sense, it's a philosophical practice. And when we go, especially if we take into account theurgy and other hermetic philosophies into the practice of astrology, it's not only the consultation and the planets, but how we understand reality itself. That is the idea that we are living our life are happening within a bigger order, a greater order, and also to recover the idea of order, actually. The idea of logos, that our life has an order, a beautiful order, actually. And not only because it's a beautiful idea, but it can represent more confidence in our life, that there is a meaning, that life is has a purpose and has an order, and creativity more than our own plans, and the fantasies of what we project into our lives. So actually, the idea of astrology, and also in its soteriological aspect, is to assimilate our life with that order. So in order to go together,
Very
our
correct.
deeper nature with a bigger nature, and not only the idea of anima mundi that was already recovered within psychology, for example, another new science with morphic field, for example, but that organism has an order, and you can see it in the movement of the star and the planets. As you can read that in the Hermetica. If you want to know God, look at the stars and the planets and ask yourself, who moved that
Yeah,
in such beautiful order.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
And
so we can assimilate our lives to that.
that's really the first step of theurgic initiation. You don't find that out typically until you're in it for a long time, and then you begin initiating other people, because you have to learn certain formulas and things like that. But what's happening is you're attempting to take the sphere of sensation, right? The boundaries of the microcosm, the little universe, and work with it in a way that makes it more like the logistikon, the logos, the order of the macrocosm. And the first thing to understand that is that, it is kind of exactly what you're talking about. When you look at a planet, it appears to move itself. But what really moves it is its logos, is its order, we would say maybe the sun behind the sun. It's not the planet itself that's moving itself. It's the God behind it, that intelligence. And so theurgic initiation is basically doing the same thing with the individual. You think you're in control, but you're not. You are not your logos. You are not your logisticon. So the whole process of initiation is then, okay, how do I allow the logos to move me? But all this kind of being said, I'm interested to have the discussion here. How do you conceptualize these underlying mechanisms of astrology? I mean, to you, is it energy? Is it psychology? Is it completely metaphysical? Does it matter?
I think that it does matter, and a lot, actually. I already said some things why I think that it matters. And to recover the paradigm, the cosmology of astrology, that is not only casting and calculating charts, but also a perception of reality. And I think that is energy and is also a matter and is all that. But sorry, but I need to go back to recover some ancient notions. But when astrology was systematized, let's say, at the beginning of our era, the cosmology was that they perceive an unseen world, an unseen reality, this kind of double reality, an unseen reality and something, a reality that is generated, that you can see and feel with your physical sense, but also an invisible order of reality. And also they have this notion of double notion of soul, that an aspect of the soul that is connected with something, with the logos and with this intelligence, and another part of the soul that is connected with the body. Well, there are different interpretations on that during the history of philosophy, of course, but to be useful right now in the conversation, this idea of double kind of reality. So within the cosmology, you have the idea already that there is a dimension of reality that you cannot see with your physical eyes, and that everything is connected. So these are ancient notions that we are recovering right now, and they are within my understanding, of course, not only astrology, but life in general. As I said, for me, astrology is an understanding of reality and not only charts and horoscopes. So I see and experience life astrologically, let's say, in that sense. And so then we have that there is a connection between what we can say energy or a qualitative aspect of life and also a quantitative aspect of life. They work together and they participate within together also in our daily life. And we have an inner experience of life, but also there is an inner aspect of reality outside us. Not the idea of inner aspect of life is not only within human, but within everything. Everything has an inner aspect. So that's some of the notion that I of not only for astrology and how I teach and see and practice astrology, but also for life itself. That's how I see also that astrology can be very useful in order to and the popularization of astrology. If people take seriously astrology, can trigger a change of paradigm very quickly. But also a kind of name or well, the name of the school I have founded some years ago, along with my first steps with academy, actually. The name is Psicocymatica, that in English would say psyche, the merge of psyche and cymatics. Cymatics for those who doesn't know about it, is a kind of science or art that where you can see the geometry that sounds generates. Well, in saying in this way is like a very linear, like cause effect thing, but try to imagine that sound and geometry goes together. When we do a cymatic experiment, there is a person who create or make a sound, and you can see the geometry. You can find many experiments in internet with water or with grain of rice or sand, different substances, but trying to imagine that works all together. So that's my metaphysics for astrology. And also because it's I think that it's very visual and helpful to understand this aspect of reality that is geometry, that goes beyond also the image and the psychology, actually. That the idea of psychology, or even collective unconscious, has an order, a geometrical order, that there is number and geometry in the foundation of all that, and not only random images or mythologies. They are not random, they are ordered. So that's my metaphysics, like psychocymatics. I think that cymatic is very useful to understand. And actually, you can see this fractal idea of cymatics, and you can see the same kind of patterns in different scales of nature. Within human beings, but also plants, but also galaxies. So there is a pattern that organizes everything and connects everything within the universe. And with this idea of fractal and cymatics, you somehow you can see that it's a very visual. But of course, you need to see through that in order to connect with the unseen reality, the ultimate reality, that how is that happen. So we don't have we are not going to have the answer for that, because that's the mystery, and it's important to. That is a secret, actually. We cannot say nothing. We can say nothing about that. So, but we can see the patterns,
Yeah.
and hopefully we can see God through that.
Yeah, or at least I like to think of it as like seeing the brush strokes of the painter, you know, on the thing. That's really it's super important. Yeah, I think what you're just to kind of like paraphrase or put it in a way where maybe it's a little bit more understandable is that I think, you know, with cymatics, you're using visuals to reveal the inherent geometry, right? So you're just revealing it. You're not creating it.
Yeah, totally. Once I read that the cymatic instruments, they compare it with the microscope and the telescope, because they with them, with this technology, you can see what your eyes doesn't see at the first sight. So in the same sense, cymatics are doing the same. But within that, today, but also throughout the history of astrology, we have this debate between, is astrology a science, or is divination, is natural, is judicial, is legitimate, is illegitimate. And today we find this idea in terms of science and divination, and if is astrology science or divination. And historically, we find that it was first divination, because the first intents of giving a scientific explanation to astrology, you find that with Ptolemy, for example, giving this idea of qualities, and was the kind of science of that time, no? Like fire, earth, well, all these qualities and science and the cosmology of sublunar and the supralunar cosmology and all that. But if we go before that, and the kind of divinatory practice of Mesopotamia, and we find practices to connect with the god and goddesses and communicate with them and receive messages. And that's the kind of divinatory practice that we find historically. We find that it was first divination. But today we have the same, in the sense that we have a very different idea of science, of course. And in astrology, you don't have a linear kind of result. If, I don't know, Mars and Venus are in square, for example, to fragment all the cosmology, but to give an example. So this what will happen, or this how you are, or whatever. No, it's not like a linear result. And the idea of divination connect us again with communicate us with the idea of communication with these entities. Let's say from the ancient times, we have the idea that the planets were deities and divine, actually. And so we can, through the practice of astrology, we can reconnect with this devotional also practice of astrology. And not only, and that requires also to go outside and look at the sky and say hello. And not only read our charts in our computers. So yeah, in that sense, and my perspective is also, as many of other academics, that astrology is a divinatory practice through astronomy.
Right, right. Yeah, and that goes back to the experiential component you were talking about before. You got to go out and look at the sky. There has to be some kind of astronomical observation. But I going back to your mention of the ayahuasca, which helped you. It sounds like it was some kind of an initiation. So you have experience with entheogenic plant medicine, and I noticed actually you practice spagyria as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how big of a part of your practice is that? Because I understand it, I practice it as well. It's very astrologically intensive, it can be.
Yeah, because we go again to this dichotomy of operation and theory, or the division between the inner and the outer that we have. No? I'm not an expert on Spagyria. I did the workshops, and I do work with plants a lot. So I try to do my elixirs myself, because for me it's a ritual, the same as calculating a chart. For me, the calculation is a kind of it's a geometry, a geometrical ritual of approaching this communication, and it's the same with the ritual with plants. So that's how I went into Spagyria and other kind of rituals. I work a lot with sound, because of cymatics. So these are different kind of ritual to communicate with that entities. So it's not the same for me to go and buy, for example, the elixir, but do it myself because it's a kind of communication. It's the same thing, and also because we find today sometimes the idea of inner alchemy. So we are splitting again this inner and outer experience again. So the practice of that, the operation, and not only the theory, for me is important because of a ritual. So sometimes during that ritual, it completes what I have found in my chart reading, for example, or another kind of ritual. And I also use a lot, as I said, I use sound a lot for these rituals, and also because sound led me to a different kind of mind that is, for me, is a key feature during this ritual. So to change our mind and the idea of altered or expanded state of mind are a key feature during the ritual, and both for calculating and geometricize the chart, but also to work with plants. I work with plants especially, not with stones, and plant and sound are my preference. And so sounds help me a lot to work with that mentally. And also sometimes when once I have my elixir or my chart calculated, then I put it within sound. It's a merge, it's like a bath of sound. And because I believe in cymatics, because
Yeah.
cymatic is also a kind of a pahiria in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's fascinating. Very interesting. We'll have to have another conversation in the future about sound because that's one of my favorite topics is combining music with this stuff. And I know that
Yeah,
you studied, I think, Hermetic music, right? Which
yeah.
does that have any basis in Ficino or?
Well, it's the idea of yeah, you have Ficino, but you have um, uh, a history of influence of that go back to Pythagoras, for example, the
Yeah, yeah.
Pythagorean theories and the harmonics of the universe. But I was very investigating sound also from my own experience. I have created like a big geometry that I was into that and doing experiments with binaural sound, for example. And so I was researching not only copying or experimenting what other side took in from that, but actually was the other way around in this kind of work with sound, because I started with my own experiences as intuition, and then I went back to the history and other that they were, because I had the theory of the music of the spheres. Uh, and since I was when I was a teenager, I started to study music. I don't dedicate myself professionally to music at all, but I've been studying music uh, since I was a child. Also, my father and my mother were into music, so music was around my life all the time. Also, my friends. I had my music bands when I was a teenager, but then it went somewhere else with sounds and not music, let's say, I don't know. So yeah, for me, it's hermetic kind of practice of sound. When you work with sound, is a very hermetic kind of practice.
So you sound extremely well-rounded, in all this stuff, and there's a firm grounding, and it's really nice to see how everything kind of, it's like a funnel. It all kind of
Yeah.
goes down, the music, the harmony of the spheres, spagyria, cymatics, the inherent geometry of the universe. It's all there in astrology. And so you talk to me a little bit about your teaching platform, Psicocymatica. What kind of stuff are you offering in terms of coursework, and is there a little bit of all of this stuff in there for people?
Yeah, little by little it tries to cover all these topics. And actually, the inspiration of the name was during my experiments in cymatics, because I enter in a very deep state of being during those experiences. So I came with this notion of psychosymatics or psychosymatica, and but the beginning was with when I was studying with Richard Tarnas. Actually, I wanted to connect his teachings with the Spanish community, Spanish-speaking community. So that was the beginning of the courses. But during that time, during for 3 or 4 years, that it started to take form, to take shape. It was nothing, something that was clear at the beginning. So it started to take shape. So yeah, we have courses, and also I like the dissemination of this kind of content. I think that also is important to disseminate in a rigorous and serious way also. And I teach mainly astrology, but there are others, scholars and professionals on symbolism and archetypes and mythology. I like to do round tables around, for example, this idea of science and astrology, for example, and others, other people that is doing very, very interesting research on this kind of things, esotericism. And for me, esotericism is like an umbrella that includes all these kind of topics that we were talking about, from the practice and the theory of that, from that includes art, music, of course, symbolism, archetypes, mysticism, science as well, and other practices as magic or alchemy, not only astrology. But within my courses of astrology, they have this hermetic path, the path of Hermes, which has soteriological aspect. So for me, this idea of therapeutics of astrology is very important, but not only in a psychological way, as maybe we can understand it today to be only psychological, but I integrate also medical astrology and magical astrology as part of a therapeutical view of astrology, because for me the therapeutical aspect is actually assimilating our lives to the cosmos. Is the idea, the soteriological aspect is the deeper therapeutic aspect of astrology. And for that, I rely mainly in a lot of methodologies of the history of astrology, and also I include lot of the develops of psychology to it, because for me are essential in order to know ourselves. in this soteriological aspect, psychology today is very important. But technically, I realize in other, Ficino is one of my main authors. Well, I have many actually, but yeah, I interact different kind of techniques from medical, psychological, and magical astrology, but with the purpose, with this soteriological purpose.
Wonderful. And you're going to be presenting at the New Hermopolis conference this year.
Yeah.
You have a presentation, but we're doing a class, right? You're going to offer a class, sort of digitally on. Are we doing that May 31st?
Yes.
Okay, that's called
Exactly.
what, the astrological self, right?
Yes, yes. And the idea is to talk about a little bit more deeper on these topics and how astrology understand the self. Actually, this what is the anthropology of astrology and what is the cosmology in which that anthropology is taking part. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. Yeah, we've been doing a series of classes now and online digital presentations where either presenters or sponsors and partners will be giving these sort of tailor-made digital presentations, and we open them up to the public as well. So for anybody that's listening, that's going to be May 31st. I'm excited for it. So yeah, Soledad will be heading that up. I will have a link to it below in the About section of this video, and I'll be there as well, along with Dina Bezarita. And Dr. Nasser, Mervat Nasser should be there too. It's going to be great. So I have two questions for you. One of them is the canned book question that everybody gets. Everybody gets, give me 3 books. And I usually spring it on them. But I wanted to ask you one question before we get to that. What would you say to people who are interested in astrology? Even people maybe beginning out as if interested in and working within it as a field of study, that they're maybe intimidated by it. Like what would you say to somebody who feels that astrology starting out is quite intimidating?
If they feel like that take step by step. Then there is no rush, step by step. And actually, is that kind of tradition that you need to get the flavor like slowly, because you have, when you go, I used to recommend even my advanced students to go back to the main principles again and again and again, because when you go, especially now that we are like translating and having many different new, not new, but new for us sometimes, techniques. And I see that there is a kind of anxious attitude in learning and knowing more and more and more, and that's fine. But I think that we can fall into this the mentality of that the words are not the word, you know. So coming back to the principles again and again, I think that is very helpful. And from that, then include something more and go back again, and then include something more and then back again. And in a very circular, actually, something that also astrology teaches is that life is circular and our personalities and our life are circular somehow. So if we put that idea into the teaching, we have a circular kind of teaching. So yeah, I used to recommend that. If for a beginning, like take it slowly. Take it slowly, because I can understand that you can see so many things in social media, and it also is also for me very, very overwhelming. It's like, okay, I cannot I cannot deal with this anymore. It's very overwhelming. So uh, find your teacher, find your teacher, and mm, do this first step and then the second step, and that's how you go through the way of Hermes.
Wonderful. Beautiful.
Um, and about the books, I think
Yeah.
that this idea of the books is the most difficult question, more difficult even if how astrology works.
That's why I ask it, because obviously I try to talk a little bit in every single episode about how the books, it's not, I use the analogy, the people, when we're learning things, and you're right, everybody wants to be an expert tomorrow. And so it's
Yeah,
not how life works. You have to
no,
very slowly earn your stripes, make
yeah,
your bones. That takes time. But
takes time. Yeah,
people dig, we're digging for information, and we think the books are the dirt, but the books are the shovel.
yeah,
It's not in the books, it's in your life. But I so I understand, I like to make that point. And I think we have several times successfully in this particular conversation. But it's fun to watch people panic when I ask them to recommend, because it's only three, right? We're all
only
kind of
three.
uh,
But I'm gonna take the license and say more than three. But I have two here. Of course, the Hermetica will will be one of that, because we can find the cosmology, anthropology that we were talking about. A very beautiful book that I really like is this from Al-Kindi, the Radis, and actually this is one of well, I don't know if the podcast is watching this, but it's a beautiful publication from Black Letter Press.
mm,
And so it talks about, well, the theory of magical art. He talks about the rays, actually, that everything emanates rays, and how that's all connected. Not only the stars, but everything is emanating rays. And more in the contemporary scholarship, I will say that Richard Turner's book are very useful in order to understand how the cosmology was changing through the history of Western thought and culture. Cosmos and Psyche is his book, especially the part of the cosmology, not the part of the interpretation of world transits. And also Nicholas Campion, Astrology and Cosmology in World Religion. They are very useful to understand cosmology and astrology today.
beautiful.
I say four.
Yeah, no, that's fine. This has been a very wonderful and enlightening conversation. So I'm so happy to have you on, and I'm looking forward to future conversations. I'm looking forward to everything that you have for us, the class, the presentation, and I really hope people, I know they will. I know they will. If they've gotten to hear you speak, I think that they will, there's going to be quite a significant amount of interest in what you're doing from people who maybe are not already aware. So I thank you for all the
Thank
effort
you.
and for all the
Thank you.
time you have spent to become the expert that you are.
Thank you. Thank you, Hai, for this invitation. I already told you I'm going to say yes to your invitation, and to talk about astrology for me is also a pleasure. And if it's also useful and inspire other people, that's the purpose of talking. But I would say that my school is oriented to, for now, at least oriented to Spanish-speaking people. So the courses are mainly in Spanish. We have international speakers where you can find the original audio in English, but they are not the general courses. We have mostly in Spanish so far. But I hope you will feel interesting in dig deeper into these topics.